This week's show brought to you by Brian Foster, who already has it named. Tune in to hear what he named it. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Darrell Alvarez. You can find me everywhere as Nerd Numbers, and with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian.
Hey, what's going on, Dre? And yeah, we're about to hit, the lull of summer, and this. I'm not too happy about this show because we're just going to badmouth everyone. And I like to be more positive, but it has to happen. I mean, look what's happening in the NBA, Dre.
Well, okay, so basically, for those in the loop, this is still the NBA offseason. We are past the action phase. If this was like a movie franchise, the beginning of the offseason was, the action phase, maybe the thriller phase. Where's LeBron going to go? Who's going to do what? Da-da-da-da-da. What's Chris Paul going to do? Exciting stuff. We are into what I would probably conservatively call the comedy phase, where the Chicago Bulls are a Judd Apatow movie of how to run an NBA franchise. So we're going to discuss some offseason moves from some lesser-than franchises, including the Chicago Bulls, the Denver Nuggets. The Brooklyn Nets look better than them, so that should tell you how they're doing. And discuss, it's not our fault, Brian. I'm going to sound like Han Solo. It's not my fault. We're going to discuss some more Kawhi Leonard, and it's just because that's a story. It's a funny one that I've noticed. I might discuss some Donovan Mitchell because he always seems to find a way to come up. But it's like, it is bizarre for people to say to a small blogger, why do you keep talking about this, as opposed to realizing the other way of going, we're bloggers, and this is news that keeps happening. Until Kawhi is settled, it's going to remain news, especially as we noted, as all the other big names become situated, that's all there is to care about. So that is what it is. LeBron James deciding L.A. in a very non-dramatic fashion very quickly was more funny, or not funny, but more sad for news. And I mean, I'm sure it's the same way, despite the fact that many journalists might say what LeBron James did was untenable back when he made the decision. They loved that, because that was story, that was speculation, that was news. LeBron James is saying, yeah, I'm going to L.A., peace. That is not news. Okay, so as I mentioned in the teaser, Brian, you named this show, so I'm going to switch up the order a little bit.
I've already forgotten what I named it. What is the name going to be?
You had a question, and so that's what happens. Normally,
okay.
For naming podcasts, what usually the best way is like something we've said in the show, and then what I like to do, so where you and I kind of will hit each other up, is like I kind of like SEO, so at least I like to include a player name or a team name. Sometimes you'll find a funny phrase you or I said. So the perfect thing is we get to combine the two, because what this week's show is going to be titled is, are the Chicago Bulls now the worst team? Sorry, mucking it up. Are the Chicago Bulls now the worst run franchise in the NBA? And actually, it occurs to me, we back in the day, like at the Wages of Wins, I think I wrote that article a few years in a row, which is a fun one. It's like, what is the worst franchise in the NBA? Obviously, we're still early, because the worst run franchise can have a lot going for it, right? It could be bad coaching, having bad players, making bad moves. Chicago Bulls, though, holy cow, are they in contention? And this is like back-to-back years, because don't forget the who was it? It was Mirotic, and who was the guy that he got in a fight with?
Oh, yeah, Bobby Portis.
Bobby Portis and Mirotic getting in a fight, keeping them both on, and then trading one, and then yada, yada, yada. They signed Rajon Rondo, which we thought was a great move, but then they gave so much money to Dwayne Wade, and that's their MO this offseason. So here's what they've done in back-to-back fashions. We already bashed the hell out of them, as you mentioned. We're going to stay negative. We bashed the hell out of him last week for signing Zach LaVine, because what we pointed out, and this might be another fun topic that's going to come up on this week's show in a future talk, is the sunk cost fallacy. It was a mistake to trade Jimmy Butler for most things, right? There are trades you could have made for Jimmy Butler, and in fact, this is a weird tangent, and I want to throw this out there as an observation, but something that I don't think has to be the case. How often is a star traded in the NBA? And the way I'll define a star is I'll use the Brian and Dre combo test. So you've got the Dre regular season star, which is if a player puts up in an 82-game series 10 wins, they're a regular season star. Because obviously if you had one of those players and then the rest average, you'd be a 50-win team. If you had a 10-plus wins produced player and an average squad, which shouldn't be hard to put together, but a lot of teams have problems with it, if you had a 10 wins producer plus an average squad, you should easily be able to win 50 wins. Brian's star is 200 wins per 48, so twice as good as an average player. And the key to that is the playoffs, because in the playoffs, when teams shorten their bench, you really need a high echelon player because we've seen this fail on like the Spurs, for instance. They have a really deep squad where 1 through 12, they're all average or above players, but they get to the playoffs and the other side has LeBron James, and LeBron James is like 3 to 4 times as good as an average player. You just can't compete. You bring a knife to a gunfight. So you need at least a gun for the playoffs, and you need at least, a 10-plus player for the regular season to get a good position in the playoffs. Now, with that being said, I completely lost my train of thoughts. We were saying that the double star, Bulls finding Parker. How did I already lose my train of thought?
I'll let you think about it a little bit, Dre. One thing I'll say is that the Brian Starr method we've been talking about did not come from me originally. And I'm trying to remember where it came from. Might have been Professor Dave Barry himself. Might have been Arturo or Ari Caroline or someone like that. But I think it's based on standard deviations above the average, basically. That's where that comes from.
Yeah, so I apologize to brave listening to the show in the future, which I will do. I completely lost my train of thought. Normally, I'm pretty good at finding it. But let's talk the Bulls. So the Bulls have, mucked up repeatedly now. Oh, Jimmy Butler. Okay, so I got back.
Oh, yeah.
They traded Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler's a star player. How often is a star player traded? And the way I'll define that is what I just said, our two tests together, the Dre test and the Brian test. Now, you're right. We didn't come up with the term, but I'm saying that they're like, I'm willing to let us have the names because they are two things that we have started using as regular litmus.
Absolutely.
How often is a star player by those two terms been traded from a team while they are still a star player, meaning they put up at least one more season off the squad? So, for instance, Jimmy Butler was a star player on the Bulls. They were traded. He did the same star test for the Minnesota Timberwolves last season. So he was a star on the Bulls. He was a star on his next team. How often has a star player been traded while still a star player? How many times has that occurred where the team actually got even close to commensurate value back? Because, like one example I made is Charles Barkley on paper was a fine trade where I think like 25 wins went out the door and 25 wins came back in the door. But the problem was Charles Barkley is worth like 20 wins on his own. The players they got back were like worth like 10, 5, and 5. Then they kind of got screwed where Jeff Hornacek didn't play well for the Philadelphia 76ers, left in free agency, went to Utah where he played very well. But it's like, you don't often trade a star player and get commensurate value back, even just on like paper. And then even on paper, it doesn't seem to work out. I don't think it has. Like that's the problem is I can't think of a star trade where it really worked out for the team losing the star. And in the few cases where it's close, like an example I'll give you, for instance, is I'm not on my game tonight. Grant Hill. When Grant Hill was traded from the Detroit Pistons, obviously he never came back as a star player. But they got Ben Wallace, and that kind of worked out. But they weren't trading Grant Hill. It wasn't a case like we have with Kawhi or with Jimmy Butler, where a star was upset and they let him out the door. It was really, he's going to leave in the offseason. Can you recoup? So, the other team gives you a parting gift to, like, no hard feelings.
Chris Paul to Houston happened recently. Another example of that.
Chris Paul to Houston. And, I mean, that's the point. Like, Chris Paul to Houston, even before the ink was dry on that, we were like, this is such a fleecing for Houston. And that's still the case, right? It's nowhere close.
Yep.
And I mean, like James Harden, it didn't look as bad because Kevin Martin played above his head like his first season with OKC. But like James Harden, even though Steve Adams turned into Steve Adams, still nowhere close, right? Like you let a star walk out the door, you typically lose. So the Bulls last year were already on pace to be like the worst team. So they might be the worst team back to back because this season they sunk cost fallacy. Because they traded Jimmy Butler, which they never should have done, for Zach LaVine, they re-signed Zach LaVine to a big contract. We'd want him to get, around 40 wins over 4 years? That's about 10 wins a season. He's nowhere close to a star player. Hasn't even been close to an average player in his career. And what they just did, and this might turn me into a Bucks fan, maybe, although I doubt it, Brian. Jabari Parker was, I believe, the number 2 pick for the Bucks, the same draft as Joel Embiid. And what ended up happening is he looked really good. I think depending on if you called him a 3 or a 4 his rookie season, we actually thought it was like Rookie of the Year. You can go back in the archives, and I think Patrick put up an article. I think we had him listed as a 3, though. He ended up being classified as a 4 for the whole season. But whatever, he was looking great. He was looking Rookie of the Year material. He goes down injured 25 games into his rookie season and just never came back. And I feel this is one of those things that just irks me about the NBA and people evaluating players, because I've seen lots of people bashing Jabari Parker and going, oh my goodness, can you believe they picked him in front of Embiid? And I kind of go, that's not fair, because he got injured. and we have no idea what he would look like if he wasn't injured. Greg Oden is the king of this. Greg Oden, in the few minutes he was able to play for the Portland Trail Blazers, looked absolutely amazing. He just never stayed healthy, and I get incredulous at fans for believing they have any idea on player health. In fact, I've lamented that as one of our biggest holes in our knowledge that always irks me, right? Where DeMarcus Cousins going to the Golden State, I almost called them the Timberwolves, the Golden State Warriors. We have no idea on his health. I can't get his medical records. I can't see his MRIs. I can't see what doctors have said about him. And so everybody this offseason, everybody's in a big huff. Some people, this is the end of the NBA. This is so unfair. I saw some people like, why are we going to even watch the NBA next season? Whatever. We don't know. That's the right answer. And this was an argument for us in the the postseason, Brian, where we were talking about the Warriors' odds of winning a title. And I basically just said, this all comes down to Steph Curry's health. We have no view of Steph Curry's health, right? The team isn't going to tell us. As a reminder, like LeBron James injured himself after the first game of the NBA Finals. We had no idea till the finals were over. So regular fans like us have no access to health data, and it matters so much. And so when you start bashing a team for a draft bust, in the case of like Sam Bowie, who wasn't really a bust, or in this case, Jabari Parker, it's like you had no idea on health. We couldn't have. But Jabari Parker has just unfortunately never been healthy, and we ended up in this annoying situation where normally the team loses. This is like the Andrew Wiggins case for the Timberwolves, where Jabari Parker looked great really young, so we thought he had upside, never came back, has looked horrible the last 3 seasons. It was like, now it is time to let him walk out the door. In fact, this is what we say this about rookie contracts, is that rookie contracts are ridiculously unfair for NBA teams because they are so favorable for the team. Even if you're the number 1 pick in the draft, you're basically a mid-level exception in terms of your contract if the team keeps you for your rookie value. And additionally, there's restricted free agency, which means they're allowed to match any deal you get. So worst case scenario, if they're afraid of how much you're worth, they can just say, find out what offer you can get. And if they think you're worth it, they can just match it. So rookie contracts are just so ridiculously exploitative for NBA teams. But where we see teams fall on their faces, you are given essentially 3 times to opt out. After 2 years, you can say, I'm done with you, rookie. After 3 years, you could say, I'm done with you, rookie. And after 4 years, you can say, I'm done with you, rookie, if they're picked in the first round, which Jabari Parker obviously was. But what most teams do is you get to that 4th year, the player has not been good. And by the way, the statistics say for the NBA, I need to redo the study, Brian. It was a fun one. But if you haven't been an above-average player by the end of your rookie contract, there is like slim to none that you're going to turn into an above-average player. It just does not happen. Now, you can point out corner cases. The easy one, I'll give it to you, audience, is Steve Nash. Steve Nash is this player that didn't look like he was an above-average player coming off his rookie contract and turned into one of the best ever. And, he was a player that now – I'm going to bash Mark Cuban because Mark Cuban was like, why didn't he play for an MVP for me? Steve Nash was a top 10 player for the Dallas Mavericks, but he did go from being a top 10 to a top 3. So that being said, Steve Nash is one of these players, but that's the point. We're talking trends. We're not talking every case. But usually if a player by the end of their rookie contract doesn't look good, you want to just cut the cord. And most teams don't, though. That's the problem. Andrew Wiggins, the right move for the Timberwolves was to cut the cord. And the Timberwolves couldn't, and they offered him the max. And so the Bucks were in the same scenario with Jabari Parker, where it was like, are they going to just offer him a big amount of money? And luckily, they rescinded it, and luckily the Bulls swooped in for an offer that was just too rich to match.
Yeah, and I want to get into some numbers for some of these guys and, do a little more of the basics.
Show me.
Well, we have to do it, right? It's like we're saying these guys aren't productive players. So let's say why. So we've got the Jabari Parker Boxscore Geeks page here, recently overhauled by Patrick. Got his Twitter photo and everything. But yeah, I mean, so he's one of these guys we were talking about before the show, right? He's a stretch 4, but he doesn't really do any of the things that you need, right? So okay, sure. He's kind of an average to below average shooter who takes a lot of shots, so yay points. I think that's why people like him. And he's kind of an average 3-point shooter. So if you have a power forward that can be an average 3-point shooter, that's something. All right, go ahead, Dre.
I was going to say he's slightly above average from 3, and I noticed so many people forgive that, where they're like, they're an above average 3-point shooter, but you're like, but the rest of their shot, what you're saying, He was last season. He was 3% better from the three than the average big, but he was almost spot on average for true shooting. So it's like, even though he can shoot from three, he eats up all that production elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, so if you've got an average shooter that takes a ton of shots, like that's leading you to be like a 42-win team, right? An average team. That's extrapolating a lot, but let's get into the real problem here. He's a power forward that doesn't do big man stuff. He doesn't rebound. He doesn't protect the rim. He doesn't do any of that stuff. So, sure, he's been in his fourth year in the league and he hasn't really shown anything. Maybe he's young enough to do something. I'd give him mid-level exception, veterans minimum maybe, not a max contract. So let's go to Zach LaVine. Same situation, right? 4 years in the league. He's a point guard. Well, I guess he's kind of a combo guard here according to these Yahoo positions, but he does a little of both, right? So, he's still below average in all these stats. He doesn't assist he doesn't have a good assist to turnover ratio, is what I'm trying to say. You want that as a guard. He rebounds a little bit, which is nice, but again, he's just a guy that he's a worse shooter than Parker, but also takes a lot of shots.
And this is troubling too. Like this baffles me that teams are okay with this. Zach LaVine and Jabari Parker both had injury concerns in their careers. Zach LaVine only suited up for 656 minutes last season with Chicago and saw a dip in production. So I am always baffled by teams that are like, and like I said, I keep coming back to DeMarcus Cousins. Why are people going, this player that was whatever, and in year three, Zach LaVine looked like almost an average player. And this is another thing we bring up all the time that I think is important, more so for LaVine than Parker, which is he's an almost average shooting guard. That is the worst position in the NBA. Really, if you're going to spend money on a shooting guard, it should either be one of two positions. And actually, ironically, I'll give them both to the Houston Rockets, at least the last few seasons. You either want an amazing star, top three shooting guard in the NBA. Even back in the day, Kobe would count. I'd say maybe top five. An amazing player like that. So James Harden, right? You want James Harden. You can spend the money on an amazing shooting guard, a top 20 player in the league shooting guard. Or you underpay for a productive shooting guard a la Trevor Ariza. You never want to pay starter's salary, which is what LaVine is getting, for even if he was an average shooting guard. So that's the problem with it. It's like you have to look. You just want productive players, but if you're going to pay money, the shooting guard position is never the place where you should be willing to take. Like you always want a discount at that position, is how I should phrase it.
Yeah, and if you're gonna here's the bottom line. Like both of these guys just don't do anything above average. They're all either average or below average at everything. And at 4 years in the league for each of them, normally you would have need to have shown something already to be a star. They could still, get there, but it's unlikely. So here's the real problem. Why open up the wallet for these guys? So I've got the Chicago Bulls Spotrac, salary page open, and it's brutal. They're spending $40 million on Parker and LaVine, which is over, 31% of their salary cap. They're paying, Robin Lopez and Omer Ashik, two players we've really liked in the past, but they're both over 30 now, and unfortunately aren't very productive anymore. You're paying them, $25 million combined between them too. So, people like Wendell Carter Jr. is a rookie, Lauri Markkanen, whatever, but fine, even if those guys develop, you've got all this salary put into these, players, Parker and LaVine, that are really unlikely to develop. So, yeah, this is why I brought this up, and it's the question of, are the Bulls, the worst franchise now? And by matching LaVine's offer from Sacramento, it's almost like they took that title away from the Kings, right? The Kings tried to say, yeah, after these, some of the bad trades we've had in the last few years, some of the questionable value kind of stuff, then we're going to put all this money into LaVine, while the Bulls are like, no, we want that honor to overpay this guy. So, hey, like we always say, good job, Zach LaVine and his agent and Parker, getting all that money. They knew what they needed to do. They needed to take a bunch of shots to get paid, and they did it. But it's not going to help the Bulls.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we keep harping this point. I keep banging this nail over and over again. it is just depressing to have bad management in Chicago because it is the number 3 basketball market. And also another aspect that Dave's brought up before, it's one thing that helps out, say, Utah, for example, is legacy. You having a good basketball legacy helps an area out. As an example, like if you look over good sports markets, I think one of them is, I'm trying to think where in the somewhere like near Connecticut, like in the New England area, somewhere in there. But I think one of the issues you can legitimately bring up with that market is that there isn't a lot of history there, right? So you kind of have to build a fan base from scratch. Whereas if you get a semi-decent Utah squad, which we saw last season, there is a bunch of fan base ready to go because, oh my God, Stockton, Malone, finals, we're going to go back to the finals. And so Chicago's got an amazing fan base. It's got a bunch of people that know basketball, that have kids that grew up liking basketball because of, Michael Jordan back in the day, and for that brief window, Derrick Rose and stuff. So it's just depressing to see them not just be a below average franchise, be like actively, they're stealing the ball out of worse teams' hands, which is baffling. Like that's the thing. It's like normally what I think a big offseason that the Warriors won by getting Durant. I was laughing at the start at how many teams were just making bad moves. As an example, the Los Angeles Lakers picked up Timofey Mozgov and Luol Deng for like $40 million. And I was laughing at the beginning of that offseason going, if you do nothing, you're winning. If you just stay out of the way and let everybody else waste their cap, you're actually doing better than average. And so the same was true of Chicago. If Chicago just let other people come in and take their bad contracts off their hands, they were fine. But they have now actively snagged 2 bad contracts out of the hands of other teams because there's a good chance if they didn't offer anything to Jabari Parker that either another team would have or the Bucks would have offered him something annoying that I would have been sad with, probably like $15 million a year for 2 years. But they ripped it out of their hands where they couldn't match. So, yeah, I think I'll have to do some investigation, but especially after the Jimmy Butler trade, the Bulls are looking like the worst team. At least one of the, if they don't win it, it's just an honor to be nominated. All right, let's talk another bad trade that I'm going to have a complete different stance on. Okay, so for those of you that know the show, I love Kenneth Faried. He's one of my favorite all-time basketball players. Essentially, I'm a self-hating Denver Nuggets fan. And I have repeatedly tried to quit the franchise. And what this franchise has repeatedly done to me is get such a productive, amazing big, especially by the Boxscore Geeks numbers, the wins produced numbers, that I can't quit him. So I started being a Nuggets fan because of Dikembe Mutombo. I was lapsed. I was a fan when Carmelo Anthony came back came to the squad and they were winning. And then I realized after the fact, thanks to Dave Barry, it's Marcus Camby and Andre Miller. And so I absolutely love Marcus Camby. We get rid of Marcus Camby, but we get Kenneth Faried. I absolutely love Kenneth Faried, the Manimal, one of the most productive permanent players in the NBA at times. Then they bench Faried, and I'm like, I can finally be free of this gosh darn franchise. And then we get Nikola Jokic. And, oh, my God, Nikola Jokic is a treasure. So Kenneth Faried is just in the line of amazing bigs, underrated bigs that play for the Denver Nuggets. The Denver Nuggets finally pulled the plug on him by trading him, Darrell Arthur, and I believe 2 picks essentially for cap relief.
Yeah, we've got the trade up here on the Fanside article. It is Nuggets get Isaiah Whitehead.
And I believe he's just going to be waived. I think.
Yeah, but I don't know anything about him. But then, so Nets get Faried, Darrell Arthur, both expiring contracts. Nets also get a 2019 first-round pick, 1 through 12 protected, and a future second-round pick. So the Nets got picks in order to take the Faried and Arthur expiring contracts.
So, as I should stress, this is a bad trade, but here's the key. The mistakes of that trade were made in the past. And we're fans of the sunk cost fallacy around here. So I think I've rehashed this like 20 times. So let's do it 21, Brian. The way the sunk cost fallacy works in economics is if you have an object or good that you've invested money into, it is tempting to believe that the only way to get equal value is to recoup the cost of that. The most common example that's used, and I believe I've used this before, is a car. You spend $10,000 on a car, you spend $2,000 on a paint job, the car starts breaking down all the time and you invest $5,000 in repairs. And then the mechanic says to you, hey, by the way, just so you're aware, this car is a real junker. You're going to need to do more and more repairs as it goes on. You might want to just move on. And you go, okay, well, what can I sell it for? And the guy goes, oh, I'll give you $2,000. So you can sell the car for $2,000 and buy just a new car, maybe $10,000 again. So your position literally is I can invest $8,000 in a new car, or I can keep this bad car that's going to need more repairs. What many people do, this is why it's called a fallacy, is they go, I can't let that car go for $2,000. I've invested $18,000 into it. It's an $18,000 car. And what you really need to say to yourself is, no, it's a $2,000 car. And would you rather have a $2,000 car that's probably going to go to zero or below zero in the near future? Or would you rather get a new car? So the right move is, in this case, obviously, to get a new car. Kenneth Faried's trade value is zero. It is zero now, and that's because he didn't play at all last season. Now, that was a mistake back in the day. Our belief is the right maneuver would have been play Kenneth Faried, get rid of the coach, and actually get a coach that would play Kenneth Faried. We were talking about Dwayne Casey being fired by Toronto after winning Coach of the Year. And you noted, I forget the coach's name, Brian, but the new coach, one of the things about him is he allegedly loves Jonas Valanciunas. And we kind of just noted, if this new coach, if all they do is play Valanciunas 10 more minutes a game in the regular season and 12 more minutes a game in the playoffs, that's already worth it. So our take would be the mistake was hiring Mike Malone as a coach. The mistake was after having Kenneth Faried, signing Darrell Arthur and Paul Millsap and then Mason Plumlee as well, right? Just overloading on the bigs position when you really needed, they needed a guard forever. They really, really, really lucked out into Jamal Murray and Gary Harris stepping up last season. As we keep noting, here's where I get my Donovan Mitchell plug. We hate the strategy of investing in rookies and planning if they're going to work out, because most rookies suck. Most young players are not productive NBA players. So if your plan for a squad is I'm going to have a rookie or a second-year player be my starter and hope that they'll be above average, that is traditionally a failing strategy. So the Nuggets really lucked up with Gary Harris and sorry, I said his name like 4 times with the other Jamal Murray.
Jamal Murray, yeah, and Will Barton too, still looking good for the Nuggets.
Well, we liked Will Barton before, and I mean, but the point being, the Nuggets, the mistakes they made were signing all those bigs and benching Faried. The thing is, you can't go back in time, right? As much as I harp on those things, you can't go back in time. There is no trade value for Faried. So essentially what they managed to do is clear money off the books in Faried and Darrell Arthur. Another thing I should stress about Faried is, well, we were saying really we'd want a coach that would play him. That bridge is probably burned as well, right? Faried is probably done playing for the Nuggets. The same thing happened with Marcus Camby. Marcus Camby was an amazing Nuggets player. They traded him for, they basically did a similar situation where they swapped second-round picks and traded Marcus Camby to the Clippers just to clear cap space. And I believe I heard after that Marcus Camby was like, I'm never playing for the Nuggets again. So this wasn't a case where like Marcus Camby gets waived by the Clippers and was like, yeah, sure, I'll come back to the Nuggets. He was like, no, screw you, I'm done. I would be willing to buy Faried in the same situation because I think he was complaining, I deserve more playing time, and then they benched him. So, it's kind of one of these situations like Faried's probably like, I'm not going to play for you if the Nuggets aren't going to fire Malone, and they're not. So it's like, this is actually the right move, and I'm fine with this move. We've noted this about picks. While the correct maneuver in an individual draft is probably just to maximize the number of picks and shotgun it, right? Pick as many good players. Go find Ari Caroline's list or Arturo's list, or back in the day, Lane Vastrav's list. Find as many of these players that are available, just sort them, and just whatever one's available at whatever pick, just pick that player. And even and if they're too far behind, if that makes sense, like if the top player you like is projected at 20 and your pick is 10, trade down for like 15 and 26 and take 2 picks. We would love that strategy. But future draft picks, we think, are just like, it's kind of, have you heard this point, Brian, from financial advisors? It's a really popular one for, essentially entitled people. It is a bad thing to get a tax refund. You don't want a tax refund. Ideal world, you actually pay the IRS at the end of the year. And the reason is, the way a tax refund works is you just give them an estimated amount of money that you think you're going to owe them on tax at the end of the year. If you get a refund, it means you overpaid them. And even if all you did, and again, sounding entitled, all you did was take that money that you would have given to the IRS and put it in a bank account that earned 1% interest, you get 1% interest, as opposed to you were giving a interest-free loan to the IRS. So the same can be true of draft picks, where your thought is, I'm going to have this future draft pick that, as you noted, probably is not going, it's lottery protected. So this first round pick is going to be late. We've seen teams just buy into, the Nuggets have done that. We've seen teams just buy into the first round. The Nuggets bought back in the day one of my favorite players, Ty Lawson, in the late first round. You can buy a late first round draft pick in the future. So instead of letting this asset sit and just do nothing like a tax refund, spend it. And in this case, they spent it to get rid of bad contracts and tax flexibility. The fact that they got rid of Wilson Chandler and Darrell Arthur, I am legitimately happy. This squad, if this squad plays Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, Will Barton, Nikola Jokic, and Mason Plumlee, that is an amazing squad, or Trey Lyles. Now, Paul Millsap is still a big problem. He's in that Andrew Wiggins category, that Carmelo Anthony category of a player that has no business starting for a team that can literally knock them down a peg on Patrick's rungs to success. We'll see what happens there. Again, it's another sunk cost fallacy thing. They've invested $30 million into Paul Millsap this season. They're probably going to be inclined to say we need to play him. My take is he's done. The good news is that this is the last year we owe him money for. Just let him walk. We've got an amazing young squad. And so what I'm saying about the Denver Nuggets with this trade is I'm actually on board with this trade because it lets them shed a bad contract, Darrell Arthur. It lets them free up the cap space for Faried because Faried's value to this team and the rest of the NBA is ostensibly zero at this point. So I am fully on board with this move. That being said, I agree it's a bad move, but the key to it is it's a sunk cost. The mistakes for this move were made in the past, and we can't really fix them at this point.
Yeah, I'm torn. I mean, everything you're saying is right there, but I still feel like we're grading on a curve. I still feel like if we were in a different paradigm where there was like really competent Nuggets management, that even as of yesterday before this trade happened, they could have done something better. You know, they could have tried stretching Millsap, you know, like we said, firing the coach Mike Malone and just really doing a charm offensive to Faried and saying, these old guys screwed up. You're our man, Faried. You and Jokic are going to take us forward. You know, there could have been other ways to do it. So you're not wrong, but I do think we're grading on a curve.
Well, to be fair, we've noted that too, where we mocked to hell the line light years ahead, despite the fact that I think you have like 20 shirts that say it, right, Brian? Because you live in Golden State. I think that's just the case.
I do have the Warriors World Light Years Ahead shirt. And in fact, their podcast is called the Light Years Podcast. So, yeah, we're leaning into that.
I joked that the Warriors are light years ahead, but that's because in the NBA you grade on a curve. Because we have teams like Chicago. Like Chicago, if we did the NBA right, one of the things we've joked about is relegation. Other leagues, like in Europe, if you're just a bad team, they're like, you are a minor league team now, and the best minor league team comes up. And that is an interesting point. By the way, to the thing we were just saying about Isaiah Whitehead, yeah, the Nuggets have already waived him. But yeah, so I think you're not wrong where in a perfect world, this would be a D+ move probably. But because we're grading on a curve in the NBA, I'm probably going to give it a C. It's a fine move. As you were pointing out, probably not the best move they could have gotten with 2 picks, but I'm okay with where it is. And I'm just going to be depressed. I mean, I'm going to watch this team play Millsap 2,000 minutes and with 48 games and make the playoffs as the 6th seed. And everybody's going to say, oh my God, this is amazing. Mike Malone's a genius. And I'm going to go, this team could have been, that's one place we always get into arguments with people on the internet, Brian, is people will see success and we will be unhappy because we will say it was good, but it could have been great. And that's really hard. It's the same point where we bash like Kobe. I got into an interesting, not even an argument. It was funny how lukewarm this argument was because I'm dropping his name. On Twitter, this person said that Kobe had a better prime than Wade. And I said, no way, Wade had a better prime than Kobe. He says, I don't agree with you. And I said, I don't.
I saw that. This is Tyler.
Yeah, if you get his name, I'll keep talking. But so
Cowan?
I think you're right.
There's an economist with a similar name to him that I get him confused with all the time. But yeah, he's an NBA Twitter guy.
But I was like, their primes were close enough. I'm not going to care. But what's fascinating about both
Wade was way better. I disagree with both of you.
Okay, well we can talk. I do think like 06 Wade was a star player and did carry it. That is the worst squad. So here's the distinction: the 2006 Miami Heat are the worst squad to win a title without a major midseason trade. And I actually want to examine this because the only team in the modern NBA that was worse that won a title was the 1995 Houston Rockets. But at the trade deadline, they traded for Clyde Drexler, who we've argued, looking at the numbers, was arguably the Finals MVP.
Was that a non-Jordan year too? Was he playing baseball?
Yeah, Jordan retired. The Houston Rockets were the 6th seed, but again, it was very much a Rudy Gobert or even a Steph Curry situation this year, where they basically had a star player that didn't play the whole season for him, so their regular season numbers were way different than their playoff numbers. But that's what I'm saying. The 2006 Heat are the worst squad to win a title without a major shakeup midseason, and it was behind Dwayne Wade. Wade won the Finals MVP that season. I don't think Kobe ever did anything close to that in his career, so that's kind of my point, but is what it is. But all I was going to say about Wade and Kobe is neither of these players was good at shooting threes, and it's actually kind of frustrating because if either of them, so if Wade could have shot threes, he would have been like LeBron level, and if Kobe could have shot threes, we would actually put him up like at that Bryant star level. As it is, we just say they're both great players, but like that is a frustrating one. So to the same point, we watch teams do decent moves or good moves, and we can sometimes come off as like flippant because we're like they could have done even better.
Yeah, my final thing on the Nuggets is like, let's look at what they've actually accomplished here. They basically moved 2 expiring contracts, right? I'll concede that Faried has no value anymore, even though he should. So we'll just, 2 expiring deals, and they had to pay a first round and second round pick for that, basically just in order to avoid luxury tax. Like that's just what they did.
To the point. Like, we even saw the Golden State Warriors do this, where they bought the Chicago Bulls pick for Jordan Bell. If they save $3.5 million, they can just turn around and spend that on a draft pick. So I don't mind. I don't strictly mind this move. And in fact, like just getting Darrell Arthur off the squad, it's so worth it for him. But you are right. Like we can say this is an okay move. This is not a bad move. The badness of this move is in the past. That's sunk cost. So even if we bash this, that's what I wanted to stress about this, is that this move as an aggregate is horrible, but the mistakes are in the past and we can't recoup those costs. But you're not wrong where you're saying this is a C move. This is not the best they could have done with those picks. This is not the best way they could have shed, just Darrell Arthur. That's what we would have said. It's like, keep Faried, and he has zero value anyway. It's like, see if you can do something with him, but they
yeah, if he has no value, just keep him. But one thing I did want to say though is I've been liking what the Brooklyn Nets have been doing this offseason. Like, we can argue what this is like for Denver. I think it's just great for Brooklyn. They get draft picks, and the cap room didn't matter from them. That was easy for them to suck it up. Let's go to I have their Spotrac page open right here too. And they just get, a solid player in Faried. Additionally, they got Ed Davis. We talked about this last week for $4.4 million. That's awesome. He's a great player. They re-signed Joe Harris, one of their own players, to a very good deal. He's 26 and has been good for them. Alan Crabb and DeMar Carroll, okay, these aren't the best contracts in the world, but these are old CBA deals, right? So it's 18.5 and 15.4. That's not the biggest disaster in the world under the CBA. And like I just said, they do have cap flexibility anyway. So, yeah, I mean, this might be crazy to say, Dre. We'll have to look at how rosters end up by the beginning of the season. But with LeBron leaving, like, I can see the Nets, like, competing for the playoffs next year. Like, D'Angelo Russell isn't great, but he's still 22. He could get better. If he does, I think they could go somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, yeah, that was the joke we were making. It's like the Nets are making like other teams look bad. So the other point I'll make is the Nuggets picked up Isaiah Thomas. This, again, just despite all I just said about Faried, infuriates me, because a big thing that Faried would get bashed on was defense. And I got to watch Moutier get way more minutes and way more shots than Faried. And the Nuggets with that were horrible on defense at the guard position, basically. So it's odd to pick up Isaiah Thomas with that injury concern. I like Isaiah Thomas. I like that he got an NBA contract. I don't think this is a great maneuver for the Nuggets. I mean, typically, what we were just saying right about Jabari Parker and Zach LaVine with injury, and then we've talked age. I don't really like signing veterans to your squad if you're not convinced they're going to be productive. Isaiah Thomas maybe had, I would have said before the injury, I thought he had upside, of course. But after the injury, I don't really think it. So I'm not a huge fan of this move. It's not a major one, so that's the other key, right? It's like a C- move. It's not a great move. It's annoying for a team that struggled with defense, and when you break down the numbers, honestly struggled with defense on the perimeter, to sign a bad perimeter defender that even at offense was good. We have some good offensive players, and Isaiah Thomas has been injured. So it's a weird maneuver. One point about Isaiah Thomas, I got to tweet about this, is he, didn't get signed for anything. It's a very cheap contract. That's why I'm not too upset/offended. Those kept merging in my head. But what's funny is when we examine player contracts in the NBA, what I think is really important is that is not what they are worth. It is a stock ticker. It is what their stock value is worth when their free agency became eligible. And some players do try and time things to get to maximize it, but sometimes players just get unlucky. And so two players this offseason, right? Isaiah Thomas and DeMarcus Cousins, if they were free agents one season sooner, they are probably combined over $50 million a year. As is, they're going to make like less than $10 million a year. And that's just luck of the draw. So it's kind of unfortunate for Isaiah Thomas that, he had that hip injury and just was never the same after it. I guess I'll be the most optimistic. I hope he plays well for the Nuggets, and then I'll let him walk because he's worth something next season.
I actually like this deal for the Nuggets. So again, though, I'll give like the two different scenarios, right? So in the ideal world, perfect scenario where we've got like some god GM running the team and coach, they it's fine. They bring him in. If he isn't healthy and can't play, they just cut him loose and don't give him any minutes, fine. But who knows? Maybe there's a small chance he does become healthy and return to that form, from a couple years ago. The problem is, though, like you said, there is this really bad scenario, right, where he could come in and just not be healthy and be playing really poorly, but then they could just run him out there for a ton of minutes unwisely and not, like the Derrick Rose scenario, basically, right? So that's the danger there.
Yeah, I always get that. That is always our point. I always get scared of having players that can sabotage an otherwise good team, and that's the point with Isaiah Thomas. He could be that player. It broke my heart. I keep throwing him out. Like Jay Crowder has been one of our darlings. It broke my heart how bad he played last season. All right, let's just talk. Patrick put an article up on the site. Hell yeah, Patrick, about Kawhi. Now here's the fascinating point. I think you and Patrick have astutely noted that if Kawhi does not play another season, he shoots his value completely in the foot. And we have never seen this happen. So from that perspective, the Spurs really should say, listen, Kawhi, we hold all the leverage. And that seems to be how they're behaving, right? They're going up to other teams and saying, we are not going to trade Kawhi unless it's for a major deal. Now, that being said, when I say major deal, I'm still getting amused when people are like, they might be asking the 76ers for all their draft picks and all of their young players. And I'm like, if the 76ers managed to keep Simmons and Embiid and if they traded their entire roster and all of the draft picks they're allowed to trade, because there are rules, right, about how many draft picks you're allowed to trade. And traded all their draft picks, all of their players but Embiid and Simmons for Kawhi and a decent player. You can throw a dart and you get a decent player off the Spurs to make contracts work. That's worth it. That's just if Kawhi is healthy and Kawhi opts in. So that's the funny point. But what I will say about Kawhi is, it's getting into this funny situation where we're laughing at the Spurs for acting like they have leverage, but as Patrick astutely noted, they really do. But that's the other thing. We have never seen a team look a player in the face and say, I don't care. We have all the leverage. And that's what makes this situation as a whole fascinating. On the other hand, this is the rough part. The Spurs have been acting weird. We spent all of last week. I love this, Brian. You said there was a comment on the show on YouTube which said they weren't going to watch because of the title of the show. And the title of the show was Kyle Anderson and the end of the Spurs. And our point was like, Kyle Anderson was this amazing player that is only getting paid $9 million a year, which according to our numbers means he only needs to earn 4 to 5 wins a season. And he has already done that on a rookie contract, meaning with the age curve, we expect him to be even better. So he is a vastly underpaid, awesome asset. And the Spurs let him walk for no reason, as far as we can see.
And it's not that not matching Kyle Anderson is going to make or break their season next year. It's more like a canary in the coal mine kind of thing. Like old Spurs would have seen, we got this great player for a super, super cheap deal, $8 million a year. Just jump all over that, right? So that's why that was kind of a red flag to me.
Yeah, and that's the point. That used to be the type of move the Spurs would make. They'd see another team, we make Danny Green as an example, walk out the door and go, "Are you kidding me? We'll take Danny Green." So the other rumor that we've started hearing is that the Toronto Raptors are in the lead, so to speak, to sign Kawhi, and the asset we keep hearing being brought up is DeMar DeRozan. Now, if that happens, that is a coup. That is freaking amazing. It's funny because I made fun of this where I said, the Raptors acquire Kawhi. They win 74 games. They're the favorites to win the title, and they lose in the first round to the Washington Wizards without Dwight Howard. Because for what it's worth, the Raptors literally have been cursed, it seems like, in the playoffs. They have lost some dramatically lopsided series. Arturo, though, was confident enough to say that, like, if they lose DeRozan, that cures all of their playoff woes. And I'm fine to believe, right? Kawhi, Finals MVP Kawhi, instead of black hole, takes too many shots, shoots them out of the playoffs to DeRozan. That is a huge change. I would not have believed that. I would have laughed you out of the room a few years ago if you ever told me Kawhi for DeRozan was ever a trade in serious contention. So if that happens, we keep noting this. If the Spurs trade Kawhi, if they went up to the Raptors and said, we would like Valanciunas, Kyle Lowry, one of their young players like OG Anunoby, or who is I think Darrell.
Yeah, so let me spell it out. This rumor is from Brian Windhorst today on the Zach Lowe podcast. We don't have the audio, so I'm showing the Real GM article here. But anyway,
redo both voices. You can play both.
Zach Lowe podcast here today. No, but what he says is the Raptors could build a trade for Leonard centered around DeMar DeRozan and some combination of Anunoby and Siakam and future draft pick compensation. So if this trade happens, and again, this is just a rumor, who knows, maybe it's leverage from one side or the other, this would be one of the most one-sided trades I can think of in NBA history. This would be a crazy good trade for the Raptors.
Here are the Raptors' top players, and we will actually give some love to DeRozan. Kyle Lowry, who was a Brian Star player and a Dre Star player last season. Jonas Valanciunas, a Brian Star player, not a Dre Star player, and that's what we said. If the future coach fixes that, turns him into a Dre Star player, that fixes so much. DeMar DeRozan was their third best player, total wins, but that's because he played the most minutes on the team, 2,700 minutes. He only put up 8.4 wins. Reminder, that means like any contract he signed, like, he is arguably worth about $20 million a year. He's going to get more than that. Delon Wright, Jakob, I don't know how to say it. Jakob
Pertl,
Fred VanVleet, and then Pascal Siakam. So as a note, and then OG Anunoby. So like they would keep their six best players who aren't DeMar DeRozan and basically turn DeRozan into Kawhi. That is, and reminder, this is a 58-win team last season. So it's like, if all you do is turn DeRozan into Kawhi, keep the rest of your squad together, including some young players like Wright and Van Vliet, who we expect to get better, that is just an absolute coup. So if that happens, that's huge. And that's where this offseason has remained baffling for me with the Spurs, where I keep going, there's no way they make that trade, right? There's no way they make that trade. There's no way they do that. But they've keep making dumb moves, so we'll just have to see. So, again, we'll keep revisiting this. I will say, the Kawhi thing, we just have not seen a team not blink in the past. So I'll be curious to see what happens there. If Kawhi's mad enough, though, that's the rough part, is Kawhi, if he wants to bite the nose to spite the face. Did I get that right? I've messed that up like 4 weeks in a row.
I think the most common axiom is cut off the nose to spite the face.
All right, I'll get it right next week, Brian. If he wants to do that and leave money on the table, or some, it's possible the Lakers are just like, screw it, we'll give you all the money. It's possible that happens. So we'll just have to see more as the story develops. But I would just not have believed we would be in this position arguing this even a few years ago.
Yeah, and DeRozan doesn't look as bad as he had in the past, right? He did have a career year. He played a lot better. And he's making, $27.7 million a year, which is way, way overpaid for him, of course. But it's not, it's a kind of an older contract now, so it's not quite as bad as, say, a newer max would be. But it's just, again, like we're talking about orders of magnitude, on the per minute production. Comparing him to Kawhi, I think the Raptors could be a legit title contender if they pull that off. We'll have to see how it shakes down. Maybe other moves will happen that will hurt them, or they'll give Ibaka too many minutes. I don't know. But, that would be insane for the Raptors. It's just a rumor, though. We'll see what happens.
But again, it's the off season, and a lot of the major news is dried up. So we're gonna latch onto this story as long as we can. That's pretty much. So apologies in advance. It's either that or be a political talk show. And Brian, I just.
Oh, I'll have one more point then on on Kawhi and the Spurs, which is that if you're thinking about it in terms of a game theory decision, and like you said, cutting off your nose to spite your face. Like that's a thing that gets discussed in game theory, right? Is iterated games where you can punish your opponent if you have multiple rounds, for instance. And the NBA is like that, right? Every season is another round or whatever. Well, but here's the thing, though. Like if the Spurs, and this is where I disagree a little maybe with Patrick, but if the Spurs get into this battle with Kawhi, it hurts the Spurs because they're not competing as Kawhi in this game. They're competing against all the other 30 teams, or 29 teams, whatever it is. So by doing that, they push themselves behind everyone else, and the other teams don't care, So that's just one note on that.
Love that team. Well, because remember back in the day, like there would be teams that would go, "We have to get a Shaq stopper for the playoffs," and you would go, "What the hell are you talking about? There is only one round of the playoffs you can conceivably play the Lakers. You have to get to the playoffs first. Yeah. It's entirely possible the Lakers fall. Why the hell would you plan your strategy around one team?"
Yep.
And
that's right.
It's the same thing you're saying here. It's like, why would your strategy be, we got to beat Kawhi in this battle of wills, instead of saying, let's put ourselves in the best position to beat other teams?
Yeah,
and I think...
Oh, sorry. I was going to say is, speaking of the Spurs, so we forget that they were a 60-win team very recently, incredibly dominant team recently, not just the past 20 years. And part of the Warriors' success in winning these recent titles is just dodging the Spurs in the playoffs, or Kawhi Leonard getting injured by Zaza. Like the Warriors kind of avoided facing the full power Spurs during their run.
And we've said that's what frustrates us about people not realizing that. So yeah, like don't match up with a team, don't try and beat Kawhi. Well, we'll just see where this goes. I don't know. It's weird, Brian, because for instance, like Joe Dumars back in the day looked like the best thing since sliced bread was a wins producer, right? Like he signed Chauncey Billups off the discard pile for nothing, who was an above average player and then turned great. He picked up Ben Wallace. He drafted Tayshaun Prince, who was very good when he was young. He on paper looked like a wins-produced GM, and then after the squad started declining, he turned into a yay points guy. And so it's like the Spurs, because they have been doing this for 2 decades, we've given them the benefit of the doubt. But ever since they got their money back from the ABA television deal, for those that don't know, what happened is when the ABA folded, which included the Indiana Pacers, Denver Nuggets, Brooklyn Nets, and San Antonio Spurs, they have to pay 1/6 of their television revenue to a former ABA team, the St. Louis Spirit, the owner of that team, and that recently got resolved. So these teams, what people didn't realize is, despite these teams were all good, the Nets, the Spurs, the Pacers, and the Nuggets, only the Nuggets are the only team of those to not make the finals, and the Nuggets are the only team in Colorado to have not made a finals. Freaking Nuggets. And those teams were basically playing more hurt than other teams in terms of revenue. And that finally got resolved. And when the Spurs finally got full money is when they went after Aldridge. So it's like, I've always questioned if maybe that was a turning point. If they were a great Moneyball team, but as soon as they started thinking, hey, we'll play by conventional rules, they fell behind. So we'll just have to wait and see. Whatever, we will give our grade on Kawhi when it happens, rest assured. We've already been giving you grades on hypotheticals. Brian, I got my shot at, I wasn't expecting this, but I don't know if you saw it. Just like that Yahoo opened, and I saw a title. I'm going to YouTube right after the show ends to see this. In the home run derby, Bryce Harper won it. That's not a surprise. He's a very good baseball player. He hit 9 home runs in 47 seconds. That is absurd. That does not. Is that I'm looking forward to this video.
Sounds like a great supercut video. Yeah, I agree.
I'm really looking forward to seeing it. So that's going to be my shout out, is Bryce Harper for that. If you haven't got any shout outs, probably better and more productive than mine. I'll give you a shout out too for letting us dodge any political talk. You saw my head go down. We're recording this on a day of a lot of, if you're in the future, just look up what July 16th went right after Trump's summit with Putin. I hope to God it's a funny footnote in the future and not something, Brian. It's something. So I'll give you a shout out for letting us dodge talking about that.
So can I address that in my shout out?
Or well, you're going to fail. I'm going to retract your shout out, but I'll let you do that because I want to hear what you have to say.
No, it's just really straightforward. If what I'm appalled by is the people that were shocked what happened today. If you didn't expect to see what happened today and you didn't expect it to go exactly how it went, wake up, and hopefully those people are awake now. That's all I have to say on that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So by the way, as you know, we're a liberal leading show, but even if you listen to us and you're like, well, just fuck Trump, just come on, like let's grow up, let's move on from that, just get him out of office. Like even if the people that are like, but Hillary, there was no scenario Hillary would have been worse than this. Come on, let's be adults. If I change even one voter, it probably isn't going to matter. Whatever. All right. Do you have any legit shout-outs, Brian?
No, not really. Shout out to Kawhi. Good luck in the offseason.
The Wimbledon was really interesting. Wimbledon and the World Cup, both fascinating. I used to be a bigger tennis fan back in the day. It had the second longest match in the semifinals with Kevin Anderson, I believe. Serena Williams obviously made the finals, didn't win it, so that was great. Good on France for winning the world. Oh, actually, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, great of Kyle Anderson to make it to the finals of the World Cup and sign with the Memphis Grizzlies in the same offseason. That's amazing. What a player.
I kept seeing K. Anderson, and I got it wrong in my head. But
this is South African Kevin Anderson, not Kyle Anderson.
Yeah. What I was going to say is I'll see if I can track down the tweet, maybe. But there was a great tweet that noted that France just won the World Cup, but they basically won with a bunch of either African immigrants or Muslim immigrants, and it's like, for F's sakes, diversity gave your team a World Cup. Can we put the freaking xenophobia and anti-Muslim feeling? Can we just get rid of that? And I agree. We are in general, when we take the best of all cultures and put us together, that is when we are amazing. And France just did that in the World Cup. Can we just, as a group, as the United States, even admit that too, right? Like, a Syrian is the reason Apple is taking over the world. So there you go. All right. Anyway, that's been our show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com for articles and analysis and tools. We go live every week, usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers on Monday. We've been keeping that pretty regular, so go us. If you missed the live show, you can catch the recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. We also have the audio form, the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, the Box Score Geek Show. Subscribe and vote us up. You can follow myself, Nerd Numbers on Twitter. Producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster is Box Score Brian on Twitter. And then with us in spirit, as always, Patrick Minton, NBA Geek on Twitter. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If your team didn't win the World Cup, you can order yourself a cookie. Talk to you later.